Miranda's mother was a secular Jewish refugee from the Holocaust in 1938. She was always opposed to what was done to the Palestinians in her name as a Jew. Because of that, Miranda became an ecumenical accompanier in 2009. She spent 3 months in Hebron and has been back many times since. She's a member of the Holocaust Survivor Descendants Network and attends demonstrations under that banner. In 2017, she produced a documentary entitled Balfour to Banksy, Divisions and Visions in Palestine. I will share a link to that documentary, which is on our website, so that you can go and have a look when you get a chance. She's a trustee of Sabeel-Kairos UK, the communications lead for Liberal Democrat Friends of Palestine, as well as being on the advisory forum of the Balfour Project and a founder member of CAMPAIN. And it's with Sabeel-Kairos UK that she went over recently to visit Palestine, and she is going to be telling us about her trip and giving us an update on the situation on the ground. So I'm going to hand over to Miranda now. Like I said, if you've got any questions for her, do pop them in the chat box and we'll get through as many as possible. Over to you, Miranda.
Thank you. Yes, as said, I am a trustee of Sabeel-Kairos UK, and as such, I represented the UK Sabeel-Kairos as part of a delegation from the Jerusalem Sabeel. The idea originally was that it would be a conference on religious extremism, but because of the situation, that got ditched really, and it became a solidarity tour instead. It was, oops, went too fast there. One thing that became apparent as soon as we went was that although everyone was very keen to speak to us, they all wanted their story heard, they were terrified, many of them, of having faces and names shown. All the faces here are, in fact, not even British. They are mainly Canadian, American, I think New Zealand, and so I think that they're all happy to be shown, except for Isa in the middle there. This was taken in Hebron. So first of all, I need to be clear that we actually didn't go into Israel except on one occasion. And I hope this map isn't too complicated. You've got the map on the right, which shows the West Bank, and then the West Bank in relation to Israel and Gaza. And we came across the Allenby Bridge from Jordan, which takes you straight into the West Bank. So, and the places we went to, Nablus, Ramallah, Jericho, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Hebron in the West Bank. The only time we ventured out was when we went to Sderot on the Gaza border. And you can see there, I've got two arrows. One, Sderot is at the end of the black line here. And this is a slightly bigger map, which shows Sderot on the very tip of northern Gaza there. This area is all under military control. So we arrived on the, it's interesting, on the Jordanian side, it's King Hussein Bridge. On the Israeli side, it's Allenby Bridge. And those people who know the history will know perfectly well why that is. There was a long queue of lorries waiting to cross the border, and there was no way we could get through. So we went round, and there was, luckily our driver knew another way through. But if this is the line of lorries trying to get into the West Bank, you can only imagine what it's like at other places. And just for your interest, that's all that's left of the Jordan River down the bottom here. Once we were in, the thing that became very apparent immediately and was pointed out to us were all the settlements. They are all illegal under international law, and they are on almost every hilltop. There are little ones, like on the left here, and then enormous great ones that overlook Bethlehem and that you just can't escape from. I remember when I was in EA, in 2009, we used to refer to this huge settlement as the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings, because it was always looking over, and at night there were lights, ominous lights coming from it. There is a huge settlement infrastructure with bypass roads everywhere that go either under or over Palestinian villages. The idea is to basically pretend that the Palestinians don't exist. They're all heavily protected, as you can see from the wall protecting on this bottom one here. You've got, and then the bypass there, and there is electricity, internet, various installations, all just for the illegal settlements. And this is the viewpoint from a Palestinian area where you can see the flyover. It's the same flyover you could see in the previous picture, and bottom a so-called agricultural gate because these people have land on the other side of the wall. And initially, of course, they were promised that they would get access all the time, and then access has died bit by bit, and now they barely get there to harvest their olives or anything else. And one of the big dangers here is that if they can't access their land and their land is not looked after, Israel can take it, saying that the Palestinians aren't using it, which you can imagine is as good as theft, basically. Well, it is theft. This is the Makroa Valley. It's recognised that the bypass, in fact, was crossing some of this. And you can see a small illegal Israeli settlement right in the heart of it. And there was a Palestinian family and business that were expelled by the settlers. And there wasn't a thing that the Palestinians could do about it. Absolutely, there's no compensation, nothing. They just are thrown out, basically. And at the moment, it's small, but like the whole of the West Bank, it's all under imminent threat of annexation. And then only Israelis, in many cases, can use it. One of the big problems we had, and of course is an even bigger problem for the Palestinians, is the closing of checkpoints everywhere. In Bethlehem, for instance, the main checkpoint was often closed for no apparent reason, or because there is an Israeli Jewish holiday. You can see on the right-hand picture an orange gate. Sometimes they're red, sometimes they're yellow, sometimes orange, that cut the Palestinian villages off from these main highways, so that the Palestinians have to use very long and quite difficult routes to get where they want to and from their homes. And here on the left, you can see that even tourist sites like the baptismal site of Jesus closed for no apparent reason. And our driver didn't know that it was going to be closed, but and for us, it's just an inconvenience, obviously. It's very different for the Palestinians. And here you can see in more detail, you can see Israeli roads, these highways being widened, and they're just taking Palestinian land. I mean, there's no planning permission or permission sought, they just take it, and you can see that they are widening. And below this, you can see there's a lorry going along this road here, and this road snaking into the distance. And quite often our bus, sometimes our coach, went along roads like this. They must get through an awful lot of tyres and chassis and wear and tear, apart from the petrol. Bethlehem. I've already mentioned that the checkpoint was closed a lot of the time. Some of you will know WIAM, which is the Conflict Transformation Centre right next to the barrier. Now, it's interesting, the Israelis call it a security barrier. The Palestinians call it an annexation wall, because it's actually 85% of it is built inside of the West Bank. So that's basically taking land. It's not on the border or any sort of border. The other thing is that you can see there's a playground here. Wiam has a playground, and this area and the refugee camp behind there is one of the most tear-gassed areas in the whole world. You just think about that. I mean, these are children and civilians, and they're routinely tear-gassed. And we're also told that the Israeli military use a thing called skunk water. I've heard about that before, but they come into Bethlehem, they're searching for people, they spray it at people, they spray it at buildings, and it's a foul-smelling liquid which clings onto skin, clothes, buildings, cars, homes. You can't, if you wash it, it actually makes it worse. And it's claimed to be chemical free, but we were told that if you're a visitor and you go back through an airport or anywhere where there are checkpoints or alarms, they can pick the smell up and know that you have been somewhere where skunk has been sprayed. So that's quite alarming, really. Right by the wall, there is a guest house called Anastas Walled-In Guest House. Up the road from there, and I don't need to show you pictures of that because you've all seen pictures of the Banksy Walled-In Hotel. Well, this is the original worst view in the world. And she's just down the road, and you can see the wall literally snakes around her building. Originally, she was paying taxes to Israel for the house, so she was on the Israeli side. They built the wall, but they didn't want her. So to preserve the building, because they didn't have a reason to demolish it, they built the wall around her, leaving her on the Palestinian side, which means that she's in a sort of no man's land. She used to have a lot of guests in the guest house, and they also have a shop. But thanks to the Banksy Hotel, unfortunately, that's all dried up. And you can see on the wall below, there's a picture of Shireen Abu Akleh, the Palestinian American journalist who was shot by a sniper. And the artwork, for those of you who know, the artwork is constantly changing on the walls, and it's well worth just having a look at that. Another place we visited was Tabor Village, which is the only village left in Palestine which is uniquely Christian. And the plan was that we would pick olives with Rabbis for Human Rights, but the various areas we went to we were stopped by the IDF, who had turned them into closed military zones. And so we all had to give up and leave. In fact, I stuck a picture of the French diplomat who arrived to do it, just to show that, you know, there are all sorts of people who turn up to help. And many of the olives just won't be picked. And as in the other case, this is a disaster for the Palestinians, because not only do they lose the livelihood from the harvest, but they can lose the land, because Israel can take that land as not being looked after or used. And it's another way of taking their resources. Most of you will have heard of the Tent of Nations, and in fact the Archbishop of Canterbury visited there the day after we did, and he's been there before and talked about it. In order to get there, you can see on the right-hand side someone undoing various locks. There were an awful lot of locks on that gate because they're very much under attack. They never get granted any planning permission by Israel because Israel is desperate to get rid of them. And in fact, they get demolition orders for all their structures, including water storage. And this is very common throughout the West Bank, that any structures, even existing water storage, comes under demolition orders. I saw not that long ago, Israel pouring cement into a spring to stop Palestinians from getting the water. They use caves for accommodation and meeting rooms. They're having a long running battle in the Israeli courts to keep the land. They've got documents dating back from Ottoman times. And there were, again, in the papers not that long ago, a load of fruit trees in fruit, ready to be harvested, were bulldozed by Israeli forces. And they've had many incursions by settlers. And this is an example here. You can see there's on the edge of an illegal Israeli settlement, you can see school buildings very close to their land. And then you can see a caravan and I don't know, a shed of some sort, and even the beginnings of a road built by settlers. And they've got no recourse against any of this except going to the courts that are heavily weighted against them. So this has been going on for 30 years in the courts, and they keep delaying things, and it's at least they're one of the better known sites, and they get a lot of support. Next, we went to the old city of Hebron. I was there for 3 months, as you heard, as an ecumenical accompanier. I've just included a tiny map. I can't go into it now because it's a whole nother talk, and a lot of you will know how Hebron was divided into H1 and H2, and H1 is the Palestinian area, and H2 has taken the old city. And here you can see we are in the jewellery market, and there's a soldier watching us, definitely being observed very closely there, and some rather nasty things that have been thrown down, a disgusting nappy and other things. And here, along where the shops are, the existing shops, that is, you can see there's mesh above all the streets, because the settlers, apart from throwing dirty water down, which is not caught by the mesh, there are all sorts of other hazardous objects that get chucked down. Chahada Street, very well known, totally forbidden to the Palestinians, even those who live on the street. They have to make exits from their properties anywhere but onto the street. We're allowed to walk down there, but they are not. Full of settlers, and you can see other bits of the old town where the shops, some of them long since closed down and in great disrepair, and others more recently. And I think the latest thing I heard on the news is that around the Ibrahimi Mosque, a lot of the shopkeepers have been told that if they don't close voluntarily, they will be closed like these ones have been permanently. Ooh, where's the picture of, missed the picture there. I don't know what happened to it. The tale of the spoon. On our way in, I missed that? Don't know. We went into a one of these shops that were still there and bought a long-handled wooden spoon. It's meant to represent a biblical parable, no, well, not biblical, but an ancient parable about heaven and hell. Again, I'm not going to go into it, take too long, but it was confiscated as we went into this part of the old city because they said it could constitute a dangerous weapon. We did get it back, but it was interesting. They also confiscated 2 walking sticks. So for the same reason. Issa Amro is quite well known amongst, he's an activist, and he, let me see, I wrote down a description for him. Oops, here we are, yeah. He's based in Hebron, and he is the co-founder and former coordinator of the grassroots group Youth Against Settlements. He advocates the use of non-violent resistance and civil disobedience, and is hated, I have to say, loathed by the Israeli authorities, who take every that he gets arrested frequently. He's been beaten up. He's been to Britain. He's been in Parliament and things like that. And it was great. It was it was really wonderful to see him. I knew him years ago as an EA. Oh yeah, the famous spoon. It's there, and there's the shop where we bought it. And the amusing thing is, amusing for us, is that we were caught there. We weren't allowed out through the checkpoint until a commander had given permission for us to go through. Never happened before. And inconvenient for us, but something that happens to Palestinians all the time. So just a typical example of, we were never in any danger. It was interesting. They made things inconvenient for us, but I never felt threatened. We went to Jerusalem, the Armenian quarter of the old city, and this has been in the news quite a lot, this car park. It's called the Cow's Garden car park, and it's part of the Armenian quarter. And there's been a dispute for a year about the ownership of the land, and some of it tried to sell it illicitly. And it would, if it would gone, it would have taken the dining hall of the Armenian seminary, private garden, parking, and homes of Armenian families. And you can see the remains of the blockade and pile of rubble because settlers turned up with bulldozers, and the young people actually camped for quite a while in the car park. And there's a long-running legal case now. And so far, touch wood and all the rest of it, they've succeeded in holding them off. So that's a little bit of good news. One of the great things about traveling with Sabeel is they get you into places that nobody else does. And this is my third visit to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, my third visit to the Dome of the Rock, but my first visit to the actual Al-Aqsa Mosque. And we had a tour guide. Again, I'm not going to show you lots of pictures because you can get them in guidebooks, but this rather unpleasant looking office is where the tour guide, where he was employed from. And you could see the broken plug socket, broken glass, the peeling paint. Israel will not allow any maintenance or repairs to anything there, which is very interesting. Not normally things that you would see, but I've heard that in other places as well. They make it very difficult for maintenance of any religious buildings, in fact, not just Al-Aqsa Mosque. And here, inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, you can see, if you look up, you can see the windows, beautiful decorated windows. Here they're broken on top of a doorway, and a door that's been very badly damaged. And this happened when there was an Israeli raid on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they shot bullets all over the place, breaking windows. And the Al-Aqsa Mosque has not been allowed to repair the damage. That's just one of the many restrictions that is placed on anybody who's not an Israeli Jew. It was really interesting in Jerusalem that you didn't notice, you wouldn't have known there was a war going on. There was nothing about that. There were no banners, there were no demonstrations that we saw, nothing to indicate even the hostages. The only thing that was disturbing that I heard very clearly late every evening, there were warplanes going overhead. They were very obviously warplanes, and they went about the same time every night. But apart from that, and that was particularly disturbing when I was WhatsApping a guy I'm in touch with in Gaza on a daily basis. So, but as we drove down to the Gaza border, we started to see a lot more. There's the yellow chairs at the side of the road with the pictures and names of the hostages on them. And if you look carefully on this car, there's a yellow ribbon hanging there, and there are yellow flags. and this was all meant to represent the hostages. And this was the one time when we went out of the West Bank into Israel to go down to Sderot. And in Sderot, we met with Avi Dabush, the executive director of Rabbis for Human Rights, and he was a survivor from Kibbutz Nirim, and Ronnie Kaida, member of Other Voice from Netiv Hazara, the closest Israeli village to the Gaza border. And they both told us about their experience and how terrifying it had been. It was a very interesting conversation. We were allowed to ask any questions we liked, actually, which was good. And so we did ask some difficult ones. And one of the questions I do like to ask is, if October the 7th hadn't happened, what then? Because Ronnie had told us how she'd tried to make life in Gaza more comfortable. She'd helped provide musical instruments and things. And my question really was, yes, that's all very well, but they're still imprisoned. They can't get out. They don't have freedom of movement. Did she see that as sustainable on a long-term basis? I never ever get an answer to that question. She seemed to feel that it was important to keep them contained within Gaza because they were dangerous, but didn't seem to acknowledge that maybe they were dangerous because they were contained. It's an interesting one. And then you've got the Avi, who was really completely different as a rabbi for human rights, as I usually find rabbis for human rights, and totally got it. He totally understood that it was not sustainable, that sort of situation. The viewpoint that you can see there, this very posh sort of area, was funded through the USA. And while we were there, school children and others came up to have a look. And I was told by somebody, overheard some of them being upset that there were no bombs being dropped at the time we were there, which gives you some sort of idea of, well. And then we couldn't get into Gaza, but you can see the white smoke. We were told that the white smoke shows demolitions. If we'd seen grey smoke, that would have been caused by missiles. And you can also see the Israeli barriers with Gaza. So that was the closest we could get. I mean, you could see down here, the barrier here, the road, and there the northern. You've got Ashkelon just to the right, past the picture. And then we went to UNRWA in Jerusalem, and we heard what they had to say about the threats against them. There are three new bills had been passed in the Knesset. The first was to designate them a terrorist organisation, along with other human rights organisations. And in fact, while we were there, I haven't mentioned that as well. There was an awful lot I haven't mentioned here. But we did actually meet with some of the other organisations that have been designated as terrorist organisations and therefore have huge problems getting funding. Now, the second bill was to rescind all their privileges, and as a UN organisation, there are a number of privileges, a bit like diplomats that they had or have currently. This is meant to come into force at the end of January, I believe. And if it does come into force, it would stop all their operations in areas controlled by Israel, including Area C of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. Area C is 60% of the West Bank, so that is a lot. Israel can't actually end their mandate because Israel did not create the mandate. And what is really interesting, of course, is it was partly created. I mean, a lot of the UN, the mandates and things were after the Holocaust. And here is Israel wanting to destroy them. And perhaps one of the most damaging policies is to impose a no contact policy between UNRWA and Israel, or with anybody in Israel presently coordinating with them. So apart from preventing operations in the West Bank or Gaza, it would prevent them accessing $3 million in an Israeli bank, and also prevent them from getting insurance on or maintenance of their vehicles. And well, that means not only would they not be able to function in the areas controlled by Israel, but nowhere else as well, because let's face it, everywhere is controlled by Israel. And I mean, seem to have got through this quicker than I expected. So that's great. So I'm now opening the floor for questions.
Thank you so much for that. We've got a comment that I thought was quite interesting from Gareth Davis. He says, it's funny listening to this talk while at the same time watching the funeral service for President Carter. Just thought, I mean, I presume not haha funny, but you know, it's ironic, I think. I had a question. If you have someone going to the area, what would you recommend they go see? What's the number one thing that they should go and see if they want to get an understanding of the situation?
I mean, you can't get into Gaza, and one of the things that is even the BBC makes very clear is no reporters at all are allowed into Gaza even. So there's no, in fact, there was very interesting, sorry, this is digressing slightly, in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, that said that Israel has denied an independent verification of any abuse or rapes by Hamas because they won't allow verification of any abuse or rapes that they are committing on Palestinians. So, but if you're only in the West Bank, then I think going to Bethlehem is actually really important because you're seeing ordinary Palestinian Christians there. And I know it, in many respects over the years, Palestinian Christians have been lucky because they've had better contacts and been able to leave, but an awful lot of them, about 60 families have left from Bethlehem. And when you hear about the incursions into Bethlehem, when I was there as an EA in 2009, there were frequent incursions into Hebron. That's another area that's well worth visiting. And if you can go into the old city and meet with someone like Youth Against Settlements and Shahada Street, that gives you a very good, but almost talking to, as long as you do not name them, you can learn so much. So everywhere we went, I suppose. We went to Nablus as well, which I haven't talked about.
Fantastic. So bear with me, we've got so many questions coming.
Oh, no, just one other thing I
Yeah,
wanted
go
to add.
ahead.
When I was in Bethlehem, we went to a Melkite church service. And on the way out, we're talking to a woman who had 3 young daughters, and she was terrified that at the moment, they can't go to Jerusalem. They literally, without a permit, and you cannot, since October the 7th, permits have largely died to get into Jerusalem. She is terrified that the next clampdown will be that she'll need a permit even to go to other parts of the West Bank. And Nablus is already surrounded by settlements, and it's already very difficult to get in and out of Nablus. So she was terrified of being a prisoner in Bethlehem.
Just wanted to say, Robert is asking if we can obtain your slides. We'll be sharing the recording of this, so you'll be able to rewatch and see the slides. Thank you, Miranda, because they are fantastic. We've got lots of people saying that they were also YAPI ecumenical accompaniers, talking about their different experiences. Amazing work. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's a program where you go over with the Quakers for 3 months usually, and then the idea is that you come back and do talks and share your experiences once you come back, and you're placed in different places across the West Bank.
It's life-changing.
Yeah, I mean, any trip out there there's nothing like seeing it with your own eyes, is there? So We've got a phenomenal amount of questions coming through, so I'm going to try to get through as many as possible. I've got a question from Lika. Do many Israelis understand or know what's happening in the West Bank?
One of the things we didn't talk to, I mean, Israelis on the whole are not there. There are Israelis that come in and out. We didn't actually talk to Israelis, but I am in contact. I have contacts both in Gaza and in Israel, and even Haaretz, the one newspaper that still reports truth, says that Israel has really become very much a police state. The best thing I can do is to compare it to the way we view Russia. That the Israelis do not get to see propaganda. They only get to see propaganda that Israel wants them to see, except if they read Haaretz or something like that. And Haaretz is under attack now. It claims to be a democracy, but people are generally afraid of speaking out. You see all these demonstrations. The demonstrations are against the government. Rarely are they actually in defense of the Palestinians. And I think a lot of them are either blinkered or choose to be blinkered about what's going on. They believe, many of them believe the propaganda. Many others choose to go along with it because actually it's too dangerous not to.
I will say from my experience, it's very easy if you live within Israel itself to be oblivious and to
Yeah.
choose to be ignorant of what's actually going on the
And
ground.
as I said, in Jerusalem, you wouldn't have known. You really wouldn't have known, other than the warplanes, you wouldn't have known there was anything going on.
Yeah. A quick question, hopefully, but we've had Sue Richardson ask, what exactly is the Tent of Nations that you talked about?
The Tent of Nations is very interesting. It's called the Tent of Nations because it's a Christian, it's near Bethlehem, it's on a hillside. They own quite a lot of land. Um, they've had, and it's called the Tent of Nations because they invited people from all over the world to come, and they have an international presence with them, and they believe in peaceful resistance, and they are been doing battle. They're known. Yes, it's an interesting. I'm afraid I can't answer when they first became the Tent of Nations, but they are one of the most well known of the um, still in existence Palestinian areas of land, very much under threat. And it's become a focal point. It is a useful focal point because, as I said, people like the Archbishop of Canterbury have been there now at least a couple of times, and they do get publicity. But although they've owned the land, I mean, they've got papers dating back from the Ottoman Empire, and many Palestinians don't because they were sort of conned into, oh, that's another long story. The courts keep delaying things. I can only suggest you Google it.
I will I will be sharing the chat box with Miranda, as I mentioned, because I'm having so many comments of, like I said, people's experiences. So do pop anything that you want to pass on to Miranda in the chat box as well as your questions. There was a question from Anthony Valion about skunk water. He's
Oh yeah.
asking if it's illegal in countries like the US. So I had a quick Google, and it doesn't seem to be illegal anywhere. I presume because they're sort of marketing it as a more ethical means of dispersing crowds and so forth, because it's definitely they advertise it, it seemed to advertise it as like food grade and, like you said, no chemicals and this, that, and the other.
Basically, I think what we were told is that if it was food grade, if it really, really was food grade, no chemicals, then the fact that you can't wash it out and that it can be picked up by sensitive machine, sensitive things at checkpoints or the airport, it sounds like there are chemicals in it.
I mean, it sounds awful regardless, but from what I could see, it's not illegal anywhere and definitely not in the States, because I was seeing reports, as he mentioned, about it being used in Colombia, in
Oh God.
University of Columbia, that it seems like it's being used more prolifically in the States by different police forces. So
Yeah.
which is terrifying. From We've got from Susan Murphy. Can you talk a bit more about this? She says, I thought places of worship were under international law and were in theory protected. I mean, in theory, we're all under international law.
Yeah, like the hospitals and everything else. Yeah, but Israel has been controlling this for a long time. I mean, when I was there in 2009, we were told that people in Area C, for instance, they couldn't do repairs, or they had demolition orders on their systems and tanks and things. Even then, and Israel is just slowly strangling things more and more. And it applies not just to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but it applies to the Holy Sepulchre, all sorts of religious sites. And Israel just will not allow any sort of maintenance or repairs without an awful lot of permission from them. And as you can see from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they're not giving permission. I'm not sure where Jordan stands on that, because there are laws, as you say, but they're flouted. I mean, Israel flouts laws. It goes almost without saying.
And there's lots of Christian groups at the moment working on the fact that a lot of Christian land is being confiscated by the
Yeah,
Israelis as well, and trying to sort of drum up support from the Christian community around the world. We've had lots of comments about people asking about the sort of Yappy program, so I'm going to pop the link in the chat box as well, so you can have
yeah.
a look.
There's a little story, if I've got time, I'd like to tell, from Bethlehem. And I think this is such an important story. One of our tour guides, his 5-year-old daughter from Bethlehem, they're Christians, believe in non-violence. They had said to this 5-year-old that an Israeli mother and daughter had been run over at a checkpoint, and that they were really shocked when the 5-year-old responded with glee that this mother and daughter had been run over. And they obviously tried to find out why. And one of the things that every child from the earliest age experiences in the West Bank, apart from anything else, are checkpoints, which means that for a start, you spend hours and hours and hours. Nothing is ever certain. You never know how long anything's going to take. You don't know which route you'll have to take because of checkpoints being closed unexpectedly. So she was used to that. She'd also been tear gassed several times. Again, that is quite normal, sadly, even for a Christian child from Bethlehem to be tear gassed. As I said, that was one of the most tear gassed places in the world, which was quite shocking to hear. But above all that, they were friends of the family of Shireen, who I mentioned, the journalist who had been killed by sniper fire in Jenin. And they had gone to her funeral. And this little girl, this 5-year-old girl, had watched her father being beaten up by Israeli soldiers at the funeral, just from attending a Christian funeral. And so, I mean, when I spoke, I actually did an address at my local church on that. And I said, well, when people say about Palestinians being taught to hate, you have to ask, who is teaching them to hate?
And for those of you who saw footage of the funeral, it was horrific. The coffin was attacked, and yeah, just terrifying scenes. I mean, hate does breed more hate, doesn't
And
it?
in fact, one of the people with us, one of the other, was a niece of Shireen who was travelling with us. So we felt very closely linked, as it were.
And speaking of people that traveled with you, we've got David Noppert. I hope I'm saying his name right. He says, I was on the trip with Miranda. Can she please address the increased military activity of the Palestinian Authority against the Palestinians?
Well, we didn't actually, yeah. One of the things that's been very apparent over the years is more and more how corrupt the Palestinian Authority is. A lot of Palestinians hate them. I was there, not this time, but in previous time when they were having municipal elections. And a lot of people would have voted if they'd had the opportunity for Hamas rather than the PA because of the corruption, because they feel that the PA actually acts as security for Israel. And I think we can see that more and more, that instead of having elections themselves and, you know, perhaps changing things and helping the Palestinians, many Palestinians see them as purely to keep law and order for Israel and to keep the lid on things in the West Bank, because let's face it, the West Bank is a tinderbox, and the Palestinians are. You hear the Israeli politicians talk about wanting the West Bank to be like Gaza, destroying it utterly, because they want the land. And one of the things that was told to us, which is really interesting, is that Israel really wants the West Bank. It doesn't really want Gaza. It's made Gaza pretty well uninhabitable, but they really want the West Bank. And I think most Palestinians, many Palestinians, believe that the PA is really, in order to keep power, in order to keep a firm hold, are playing into Israeli and keeping and being violent in keeping the peace for Israel. That's the best I can do, because we didn't see that. Oh, sorry, we did have one example. When we were at the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem, the Palestinian police actually did a sort of conference with us, impromptu, and we were allowed to ask some questions. They were lovely, actually, but they did say that there were many Israeli incursions. They're certainly not part of the clampdown, but they were saying that Israel just comes into Bethlehem to arrest people and to do, you know, sort of at will.
Well, following on from that, we've got from Kirsten Dahlberg. Did you see or meet any of the settlers, and did you witness any settler violence in the West Bank? It was bad enough when we were EAs, 2009, 2010, but is it worse? But it's worse now, as from what I can see, and the statistics do unfortunately show it is.
Long before I mean, we've all seen on the news before the 7th of October, the increase in violence in the West Bank from settlers. I mean, that has been growing. And I think some people are saying that the reason why Hamas was successful on the 7th of October is because Netanyahu had his eye off the ball, because he was concentrating on aiding settlers to cause mayhem in the West Bank. And yeah, we didn't. I mean, Sabeel is very careful. Sabeel is safe. You can travel. I do recommend, you can hear that. I really recommend going with Sabeel. You learn a great deal. But I have been threatened in the past by settlers, and this was years ago. Even when I was in EA, I remember one settler saying if they bumped into me again, they'd kill me. They're a lovely lot, really. But they just got worse because they become more powerful, and they are almost used as sort of militia, and the IDF support them. So yeah, we didn't see it when I was out there on this occasion, but it's very apparent, and we heard about it a lot.
We've had some people questions about Sabeel-Kairos. I'm going to pop the link to that, as well as I already popped the link in for Yapi, because it is a really good idea to join a delegation
Oh
to
yeah.
visit, because obviously it's logistically it's a lot easier, and it gives you access to people that you might not be able to access in organizations and places, as you said, like the Al-Aqsa Mosque, that are very difficult to do as an individual traveling to the region. And it does mean that you've got someone looking out for what's going on in the area. You know, you need to have people who have their ears to the ground and know that, okay, something's kicking off over there, maybe we'll go over here.
I
So
have travelled many times on my own, but I wouldn't at the moment.
yeah, it's difficult, and especially if it's the first time at the region, or the first time you want to do something where you see more of the sort of situation on the ground rather than a touristy or religious holiday, then we definitely recommend going along with.
The other thing I would say is that we couldn't have flown into Tel Aviv anyway because the airport was shut, and it was very nice. At least it helped that I'd never done it via Jordan before, and it was useful to have contacts on the ground to help you negotiate all of that.
It's just a lot easier because everything is so much more difficult than you could possibly imagine in the region, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, just having someone to do that for you and arrange everything is always nice, isn't it? Um, I always try to end these on a little bit of a positive note, but it's getting harder and harder. But I'm gonna try. So we've got from Judy Dixie, you're currently talking to the converted, sympathetic people, or at least people that want to know more, our audience here. Any thoughts on how we can engage the people who are supporting Israel's approach to Palestinians?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of very good organizations, and I said a lot of them have been designated terrorist organizations now with funding, um, and that has become a huge problem. And that's why, if you like, I said that Israel itself has become a bit like Russia in that sort of way, that it's been controlled and the Israelis are controlled. Many Israelis are leaving. There is a lot of suicide amongst returning IDF. There's a lot going on in Israel, and their economy is dying because obviously a lot of companies do not want to be classified as buying into genocide. And I think that gives you a clue, you know, this there is so much evidence now of the genocide and ethnic cleansing. No one can deny it. That anything that Israel did has gone beyond anything that could possibly be termed self-defense or even vengeance, because what they're doing in Gaza, I mean, I'm in contact with people in Gaza on a daily basis. I mean that, daily. There's a young man who we talk every single evening, and he's starving. I mean, the cost of things there. So I think raising what I'm doing now, I think what this is, it's about raising awareness. It's about contacting your MP, about contacting papers. It's about talking truth to power. And it's about not allowing those that would have intimidate us by describing us as anti-Semitic or anything like that to get away with it. We have to stand up. I belong to, as said at the beginning, a network which is Holocaust Survivor Descendants Network. And we put in a submission to the Home Affairs Committee along with other groups, along with the Balfour Project, on this sort of area, that it is appalling that there are spokespeople who claim to speak for British Jews, who only actually speak for a small proportion of them, who seem to control the agenda quite often. And I think it's so important that, from whether you're a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, to stand up and say, this is not about religious warfare. This is about land grab. This is about nation empire building. It's nothing to do with, I mean, the Muslims, Christians, and Jews who were there prior to 1948 rubbed along. I know Zionist people who would call themselves Zionist, but who are not, who are opposed to what Israel is doing entirely, and to defend Palestinians absolutely, and end up in prison or hospital for doing so. So I think speaking truth to power, badgering your MP, putting letters in newspapers, going on marches, and telling your neighbour, telling your friends the truth. So when you hear something on the BBC or anywhere else that doesn't ring true, questioning it and talk to people about it.
Thank you, Miranda. I would just like to say that we do have a lot of our all of our webinars, almost entirely the whole back catalog, on our website. So do have a little look at the past events because we have some former Yappies who presented to us and lots of other different topics that might be of interest to you. Share the webinar, share this one when I send out the recording, share it far and wide. I would also like to just give a little shout out to some of the Israeli organizations because they kind of came up in passing quite a few times here, but we have things like B'Tselem, ICAD, a whole bunch of other organizations that are phenomenal as well. So
And
do,
Haaretz, the newspaper, the Israeli Jewish newspaper Haaretz. Now it's behind a paywall.
yeah.
Can I say that the moment it's still surviving and it's the best source of news?
It is really very good. I just wanted to also say that we do these webinars for free. We're trying to do 2 a month. I'll pop a little link in the chat box for donations if anyone is so inclined, and also to sign up to become a friend of the Balfour Project, which is to sign up as a regular donor. It means that you get free or discounted tickets at our paid events and a bunch of other things such as a quarterly meeting with key people from the Balfour Project and special guests and a whole bunch of other things. And it also just really helps us out in terms of admin, keeping admin costs down and future planning and so forth. So I'll pop that in the chat box. I do also want to just tell you that we have now secured our date for our conference this year. So I will pop the link in the chat box as well. It will be at King's again, but this time the Strand building. And it's on the 8th of May, the afternoon of the 8th of May. I'm going to pop the link for that in the chat box as well. I'll be sending out emails, multiple emails as we secure speakers. We're just working on the lineup of the speakers and it's going to be amazing. So hopefully you can come along and join us. It will be online as well. It's free online, paid to attend in person, but very reasonably priced. I hope you will agree. So hopefully we can get as many of you supporters in a room as possible to come in and share that knowledge with us on the day. I wanted to hand over to you for the final question, Miranda. First of all, I know you wanted to talk about a way of supporting because I
Oh,
know
yeah.
us feel very helpless. And I know you've got an option
Yes.
that want to. Obviously, we've already given one option, support the Balfour Project, but you will give another one. And then I wanted to end on one final question, which kind of, I think, ties into what you were going to tell us. This is from Kenneth Ramsey. Do the Palestinians you have spoken to know of the support that ordinary people in the rest of the world have in their hearts and want to do whatever we can to support them? Do they understand? Do they get a feeling of the solidarity that we feel around the world?
Yes and no. They shouting out, they know people listening, they really, really value people coming to Palestine. They were really pleased that any of us who do this, who are talking to others, but they also feel terribly let down and abandoned because, let's face it, no other, you couldn't have that happen anywhere else in the world without sanctions and condemnation in a way that there just isn't. And, you know, when we had this in Gaza, I've been supporting a family in Gaza now for many years. And long, I mean, they lost a home in 2014, which was bombed by Israel. The history of Gaza, people do not, they forget that 70% of those living in Gaza are refugees, descendants of refugees from the Nakba, the creation of Israel, and that 50% of those living in Gaza are children under the age of 18. And they're in prison. When we talked to that woman at the border, this idea that you mustn't let them out because they're frightening. Well, we have so many tales. For the cost of any medication or anything was always huge there. When Martaz, the father of this family, needed to have treatment or anything else, So much money had to be raised just to enable him to have any treatment, to have an operation, anything. And now it's like a black hole. You wouldn't believe if I send £50, which I do very frequently, along with much bigger sums as well, just to try and feed one person, Amro, who I'm in touch with every single day, who is starving. By the time the £50 has gone, it goes to, and I know it gets there, that's the main thing. This is one really good way of getting it to them. Goes to their brother who is in Belgium. So that is free for me to do, from me to this guy in Belgium, Mohammed. And he then gets it into Gaza into form of cash that Mohammed, that Murtaz or Amro can actually use. And by the time £50 is reduced to $30, basically. And for $30, you can buy a sandwich and a bottle of water. I mean, it is that bad. Paracetamol, $40 for a sleeve of paracetamol. It costs $200 just to buy a basic fleece blanket. A pair of ordinary cheap trainers, $250. And all of that without money going in directly to these people. And let me say straight away, they are not getting aid. They are not. Amro cannot get aid directly to him because he's a young man, he's not a child, he's not an old person, and aid is so limited, it's not available to him. And without money going directly to these families, and I know I'm in touch with others as well, without getting that money directly, they're literally starving. And I think Amro, despite the money I send, I still think he is. And that's why I plead everywhere I go for money, because I don't know how long I can keep them alive. And if this goes on, I mean, you can hear my desperation. How long can this go on for? My one hope, which is a very negative hope, is that Trump will prove himself to be, to shock everybody, because he won't like Netanyahu having one up on him. He'll want to be in control, and so he'll stand for. That's my one hope. But he'll suddenly surprise us all by saying enough is enough to Netanyahu, no more, you can't do this. But it's a faint hope, you know.
Yeah. Awesome,
Biden's been
Miranda.
good.
Thank you so much for coming along and sharing your experiences. And I'm really sorry to everyone who asked questions and we didn't get a chance to go through them. There were so many. I will be sharing the chat box, like I said, with Miranda. So do pop any comments. You've got maybe a minute of me waffling on to make a little comment in there if, about what you thought about the talk. I thought it was very moving and really, really it's just insightful, and got lots of people asking if this is recorded. It is recorded, and it will go on the website and YouTube and our podcast platforms by this evening. So like I said, we'd really appreciate if you could share it far and wide because it's so important. It's so important for people to learn about this and to hear from people like Miranda. So thank you again, Miranda, and thank you everyone who came along and listened and asked questions and made comments. Thank you. And I hope you have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you.